Your host, nationally acclaimed speaker and author, Debbie Georgatos. Ladies, Can We Talk starts now.
Well, hello, and thanks so much for tuning in to Ladies Can We Talk. This is Debbie Georgatos. I'm so happy every week on Sunday night when 6 o'clock comes around, we get to jump on the radio for 2 hours and do Ladies Can We Talk. And tonight's show is just full of great subjects and stories and great guests. In our second hour, I have my leading lady buddies joining me, Carrie Kellerman and Jenny McGarry. And in this show, Ladies Can We Talk, we're all about trying to re-inspire Americans to relearn the idea of what America is. What is the American identity? And the reason that matters so much is because in the political season that we are in the middle of, and we're going to have a presidential election later this year, people sell ideas and policies and tell you, oh, this is great, that's great. But most of us know that America is the most precious, special, unique country on earth, and we want it to remain this way. And so what we try to talk about on the show is trying to dig in and understand why America's great, what made it great, and how we hold on to it. So I've dedicated Ladies Can We Talk for this entire year of 2016 to the idea that we all must learn again what the American identity is, reclaim that identity, embrace it, and fight for it. So on this show, this first segment, I always do my Speak Up for America segment, and I wanted to tell you what something I did this week. I went to a meeting, or this past week, in Austin, Texas, a meeting of this organization. It's a think tank called the Texas Public Policy Foundation. I'll tell you more about that in one moment, but to quick run through the show, we're going to have an expert talk with us in the next segment of the show about an expert from Heritage Foundation about President Obama's gun regulations, the new regulations that President Obama in a very teary press conference announced, and what those really mean for the average person, whether he has the constitutional authority to do that, what's the practical impact. These are important things. They're bigger than just a narrow little question of law about guns. They tie back to liberty. So we're going to talk with someone about that. And we just have a show lined up. We're going to talk about what's happening in Hillary's campaign and stories coming out about her and whether she actually has a legal right to be president. We're also going to be talking with an expert in the next hour on marijuana legalization. There is a push in states around the country. 17 states have bills pending trying to push for legalization of marijuana, not just for medicinal purposes, but for recreational purposes. But as we say so often on the show, facts matter. We're going to hear from someone telling us what's happened in Colorado since the legalization of marijuana. I mean, the practical impact for safety, for highway deaths, for children becoming hooked. We're going to learn what really is going on. And frankly, we have a legislator in Texas pushing this idea of legalizing marijuana here. And once the medicinal legalization happens, we may be on the path to recreational use. We're going to talk about that. So the show is jam-packed. But in this very first segment, I always want to focus in on one aspect of standing up and speaking up for America. And I want to tell you about this conference I went to in Austin, the Texas Public Policy Foundation. Many great speakers, but the one that really stood out, and I want to share with you tonight, in fact, he's going to come on our show with us next week, is former United States Senator Tom Coburn from Oklahoma, who's also a doctor, Dr. Coburn. And he actually left his Senate seat in the middle of his second term, which is unheard of, and it wasn't due to a scandal. He left because he told the audience at Texas Public Policy Foundation, when I went to let them know I was going to leave, I told them the reason is because the Senate and the Congress cannot fix what's wrong with America. And so he ran through a long list of reasons. We can't do it in the short time we have today, but he talked about the idea that in America, we are losing liberty. We have this incremental growth of power in the federal government. More and more things are aspects of American life. The federal government believes it has power, authority, and legitimacy to regulate and to control. And so he left the United States Senate to become active in the movement for an Article 5 Convention of the States. And you've probably been hearing about this. And we, on Ladies Can We Talk, will be talking about this in several upcoming shows and throughout the year 2016 and beyond, because it's a really important thing to understand. It's an important thing that's full of misleading statements by people who either don't like what they see coming from a convention of states, and misleading by people who are just fearful that maybe bad things will occur. And, I talk on the show quite often about the founding of America. Did you ever stop to think at the founding of America, also at the time of the Civil War, when Abraham Lincoln declared we are going to end slavery, all of those brave stands, standing up against King George whims, declaring Declaration of Independence and fighting the Revolutionary War. Leaders throughout world history never knew when they got started if they would win. President Lincoln did not know if the war would come out the way it did and that slavery would be abolished and we would keep the Union. George Washington didn't know, and the other leaders of the Revolutionary War, whether they would be able to be successful in overthrowing the then most powerful nation on earth and establishing freedom in America. So fear can play a part in our thinking in every generation. And right now in America, we live in a time in 2016, in this time, in the last, I don't know how many years you want to call, 20, 30, 40 years or more, where the federal government has grown in power, control, just the absolute insistence that the federal government will regulate every aspect of your life and you will have nothing to say about it. We're going to talk later in the show tonight about President Obama's attempt to establish more control over the right of American citizens to bear arms, to possess and bear arms. The Second Amendment is not fuzzy. It's not unclear. The Second Amendment clearly says citizens have the right to bear arms. But what President Obama is doing is creating and adding conditions and limitations. And so it matters not to abstractly say that, but to really understand what these new regulations are, what they'll do for us. And this is a good example of the kind of loss of liberty that Dr. Coburn was talking about, Senator Coburn was talking about at the Texas Public Policy Foundation meeting. He was talking about the idea that we have a growing federal government, whether it's the EPA, that wants to regulate every drop of water and everybody's private land throughout this country. If you didn't know that, that's true. Whether you have the environmentalist movement in America, growing and trying to expand its power to where it controls all sorts of industry, major industries being shut down or so limited by massively controlling regulations coming from the EPA, not from Congress, but from the growing federal bureaucracy. We have astounding national debt that grows and grows and grows. We have candidates who run every time and say, we're going to get this debt under control, we're going to get the budget under control, and it never happens. We have people who live their professional lives as members of Congress or the Senate. We have professional career politicians, not at all what our founders intended. We have this debt that I mentioned is so off the wall and so extraordinary that it becomes impossible to even comprehend, and no plan in sight, no commitment in sight to get it under control. And the impetus for people in Washington is to keep on passing out goodies to the citizens to keep on being reelected, even if we can't afford those goodies. And so the idea of a convention of states is this. Our founders provided for it in the Constitution. It says, the Article 5 Convention, it is a article of the United States Constitution that says that in America, if you can get 34 states to pass legislation calling for a convention of the states, and it can't just be a vague one word, we want a convention of the states. What has to pass in the state legislatures has to be specific as to the things they want to add to the Constitution. There's nothing in the Convention of the States that can take away the Constitution. It is not a constitutional convention. Those are two different animals, constitutional convention or convention of the states. What's being called for by Tom Coburn and many other leaders in America, including now Texas Governor Greg Abbott, is a convention of the states where the states meet and hold a meeting to articulate and debate and vote on, just like at the founding of America, vote on additions to amendments to our Constitution so that we can say, for example, we're going to impose term limits. We are not going to have members of Congress and Senate voted in for life, which is pretty much what happens. We're not going to have, there's a discussion whether we should have members of the Supreme Court and the other federal courts. Should they be appointments for life? Or should there be a term limit spelled out in an amendment to the Constitution? Can we have a balanced budget amendment where we actually say, you must balance the budget by a certain period, and you could even add to that a limit, a cap on spending, such as the spending that the Congress votes for in its legislation can never exceed X percent of the GDP without, and there's always some emergency provision in there in case we have some big national disaster where we have to exceed the spending limit. America cannot address in any other way the major challenges America faces because you've been trying for years and years and years and years, and Congress doesn't listen, and the Senate doesn't listen, and the government doesn't change, and the problems go on and on. This is the nurturing at the root of freedom, rethinking of America that is underlying this Convention of the States. There are people on the conservative side who love America who are afraid of it, but I think the fear comes from ignorance. So I'm going to have to wrap up this segment, but we are going to, as we move forward throughout this year and probably beyond this year, definitely beyond this year, talk about what is so important in keeping America strong, safe, and secure that is worthy of an amendment to the Constitution. And we are going to be focusing on and trying to get to 34 states to agree to a convention of the states, to sit down and talk about what can we do to get our country back on track. Can we do amendments to the Constitution that will cure some of these otherwise incurable problems America seems to be facing, such as an ever-growing debt and no responsibility by either party on either side of the aisle, on both houses of Congress, to get it under control. This is one example. But I want to close this segment about Speak Up for America to say this. It took bravery for the founders to decide in America to found this country and say, we are going to overthrow King George. It will take bravery in the American political conversation today to say, we are going to fight for a Convention of the States, a meeting of at least 34, probably all 50 states, but have 34 states pass a list of areas where we're going to propose and discuss amendments of the Constitution. It is really a getting America back on track, back on foundation, and back to its founding roots. It's not about the fundamental transformation that Barack Obama tried to do, which is to take us down a left-wing socialist style of country, is to put us back to our roots of liberty. This is Debbie Georgatos, and Ladies, Can We Talk? Coming up the next segment, we have coming on with us an amazing expert named Hans von Spakovsky. He is a constitutional expert. He's with the Heritage Foundation. We're going to talk about President Obama's new gun regulations and whether he has any right to do that. So hang in there. Come back after the break to Ladies, Can We Talk?